We're having a conversation this morning about far-right groups and movements in Canada and the xenophobia that has been apparently behind, or has fueled, at least may have been, although we don't have definite determination of motivation for the shooting in Quebec. Certainly discussion of the far right has emerged since. The Sûreté du Québec, the provincial police, reporting in fact more than 170 cases of hate speech since the attack, and that appears to be part of a trend right across the country. These are numbers from Statistics Canada. Reported hate crimes based on religion went up by more than 100 from the year 2013 to 2014, which is the most recent data available. The province with the most significant jump was Quebec, and the religious group most targeted, Muslims. So how this all plays in, as we've said, motivation of the man accused of the Quebec mosque shooting, that has not been determined by authorities yet. But we do know that Alexandre Bissonnette, who is now charged with first-degree murder, 6 counts of that, is someone who has been revealed to be someone with far-right sympathies. He admired Marine Le Pen in France. He's an admirer of Donald Trump on the issues of immigration. So we wanted to speak to the gentleman you're going to meet now. He's one of our CBC journalists in Quebec City, Jonathan Montpetit. There he is in the studio. But I want to show you, as I introduce you, some of Jonathan's activities. He's given us over recent months some fantastic exclusive reporting. He's documented this group you're going to learn about, the Soldiers of Odin, as they patrolled the streets. He has met the founders of a group called La Meute, the Wolf Pack, which is a very prominent group in Quebec. And he's here with me for a conversation now and in the next hour as well about the far right nationally and in Quebec. So, Jonathan, good morning to you, number one.
Hi, Heather. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And I'm glad you're here because we've been actually soliciting questions from our viewers about the far right in the country. And it's interesting. We talk about these being secretive groups, and I think many of our viewers wouldn't even maybe know these groups exist, certainly to what extent. So let's begin with a very first basic question, like to know if the phenomenon we're talking about is limited to Quebec or is this happening across Canada? What's the reality, Jonathan, for far-right groups in this country?
It's difficult to get a handle of it, or to get a very precise handle on it. I mean, the research that I've done has been largely based in Quebec, and we've profiled the last several months 4 or 5 groups that seem to be kind of the main groups in Quebec. These groups range in size from a few dozen to several thousand. There are groups like this across Canada. I think there's they have a particular I think there's a particular ecosystem that exists in Quebec that may not be as visible as it is elsewhere in Canada. I think the blend of politics here and the blend of cultural influences make it so that these groups feel a certain comfort in acting in the open. It's important to point out, one of the groups we profiled, Soldiers of Odin, does have a presence across Canada. They're quite present in Vancouver, Alberta, Ontario. They recently, I think just before Christmas, patrolled for the first time in Toronto. So,
yeah, we've been looking, Jonathan, at pictures both from Saskatchewan and from Edmonton as well, as they've been doing their patrols. Hold on for just a second, because I want to explain what these patrols are. But you hit on something, this ecosystem, which is a really interesting way of describing this, because our second question has to do with the Quebec situation and how important, meaning how big, do we think the extreme far right in Quebec is? I've never met anyone like this, and many people haven't. So you've already said it's significant as a presence in Quebec, particularly because of this ecosystem and the way of, the Quebec political and religious tradition. You want to just elaborate on that just for a moment and answer that viewer question?
So a lot of the people I've spoke to, mentioned Quebec. The concern for Quebec values, the concern for Quebec's traditions. Quebec obviously is a predominantly francophone province. The Quebec politics has been dominated by the concern for the survival of the French language. That gives rise to, I think, a very particular kind of nationalism, not necessarily xenophobic, not necessarily right-wing or conservative in any way, as the Parti Québécois obviously has a very long social democratic tradition within it. However, I think the political climate in Quebec is one where ethnic nationalism is already within the public sphere. Mm-hmm. It's then, I think, a short jump for certain groups to kind of use that ethnic nationalism to to kind of slip into the far right category, where criticisms of multiculturalism as a policy become criticisms of multiculturalism in general.
Okay, hold that thought, because I want to introduce some of the groups in a second. But one last quick viewer question, which has to do with the point you were just making. Someone wondering if these groups are predominantly French or Francophone, or is there a mix? Is it Francophone based in terms of protecting the French fact for the Québécois de souche, or are there Anglophones who are members of these groups as well?
So the groups that I profiled are predominantly French, preserving the French language, the Quebecois culture, traditions is very important to them. However, I think this is a very important point to make, they don't identify with the kind of constitutive division of Quebec politics for the past 40 years, which is the federalist sovereigntist divide. That for them is not the key problem. The key problem is immigration, identity, things like that. So these groups, you'll often see both federalists and sovereigntists within the group, and they don't feel that is that difference is enough to exclude somebody from the group.
That's really interesting. Okay, and that is what has given rise to some of the groups we're going to look at next. We showed pictures of you actually having met the founders of La Meute, the wolf pack, with their very distinctive paw, the paw that is their symbol. Tell us about La Meute.
So La Meute, as far as I can tell, is the most public, the most visible of the far-right groups in Quebec. They are, at the moment, mainly a Facebook group. They're a secret Facebook group. You have to apply for membership to be able to access the pages. But they have 43,000 members. Now, how many of those are active members? How many of those are actual people? Very tough to say. But if you look at the other far-right Facebook groups, none of them have anywhere near that size of membership. And importantly, as I interacted with the group, they were trying to transition away from being a strictly online group and become a real political force in the province. They were engaging in fundraising activities. They're undergoing a kind of a major organizational overhaul in order to give them the kind of resources they feel they'll need to influence Quebec politics, not just today, not just tomorrow, but going ahead 5 or 10 years. They really do have quite ambitious aims for creating a different political climate in Quebec where their ideas are more acceptable.
Like a lobby group.
It's exactly how they referred it to me, a lobby group, and not only at the federal level, but also at the provincial and at the municipal level, so that they would have cells across the province of organized individuals able to mobilize whenever an issue surges up, and so that they can kind of address it immediately wherever it may appear in the province.
Talking with a CBC journalist, Jonathan Montpetit, who's with me in Quebec City. By way of introduction, if you weren't with us last hour, Jonathan's done this very important research and investigative looking at the far right in Quebec. He's been out on patrol with the soldiers of Odin. You see in this video here, we're going to talk more about that. He has met the founders of a group called La Meute, the wolf pack, and he has met their founders, as you see in this picture. And Jonathan's been with us to answer some of your questions and mine about the extent of far-right involvement in the province of Quebec, notably. So, Jonathan, hello again, and thanks for being with us for part 2 of our conversation.
Yeah, great to be back.
Well, before we move on, I want to just conclude with a couple of things about La Meute, the wolf pack. As we mentioned, this is the group that has more than 40,000 members on his Facebook site. Bring up that picture, if we could, with the founders again. You have met the founders. I just wonder who they are, what they're like, if they're scary individuals, or what your experience was.
Well, at the risk of offending many people, they were incredibly warm and open with me. They really feel like they have nothing to hide. And once I was opened a dialogue with them, eventually what they did is they invited me to observe in one of their fundraising activities, and the picture you see there is from that activity, which took place at a bar in a very small town not far from Quebec City.
They're former soldiers, right? The founders
That's
are former
right.
soldiers?
So two of the people you see there in that picture, Eric Corvus and the fellow to his right are both former soldiers. Eric Corvus has since left the group. Since we wrote about it, he's since stepped down as the kind of founder leader of the group. He still takes part in some online discussions, but he's no longer plays an active leadership role. He is a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. And it's not only at the leadership level, but throughout the group, there are quite a few former soldiers in the group, and they really, the structure of the group is really drawn from military, draws from that military influence. It's just very hierarchical, exactly, yeah.
And then the man on the left, just for people to understand, that's actually their media relations guy. This is how organized they are, and as you told us last hour, primarily on Facebook, but looking to broaden their organization on the ground and become something of a lobby group. Let's turn to the group that we're looking at here, though, video. This is a group called the Soldiers of Odin. Tell us, you followed them as they patrol. Now, tell us about what these patrols are and what they do in the course of that activity.
So the Soldiers of Odin, just to go back for a second, Soldiers of Odin is a group that was founded initially in Finland in response to the influx of refugees there. In Finland, the group has close ties to neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and have several members have been linked to racial violence. And in Finland, what they started to do was to patrol areas of towns where there were large numbers of refugees. Now, as the group came to Canada, they wanted to reproduce these patrols. Now, Quebec has laws that stem from the student strikes that prevent you from walking in the streets with more than 4 or 5 people without getting a permit. So the Quebec City patrols are quite small. There are only four people on them, and they walk around. Basically, they say to prevent crime, to reach out to homeless people and the like. But I think the deeper message they're trying to send in these patrols is signaling to immigrants and refugees and the Muslim populations in particular that there's a kind of a group willing to stand up for Quebec values. That would be at least their justification of it. When I met with the group, they were trying to moderate their message. The leader at the time was trying to broaden their appeal and move away from the Finnish roots of the group. That leader has since left the group. He's been replaced by somebody else who wants to bring the group back to its Finnish roots. And so when I spoke to her just before Christmas, her plan was to instigate patrols in areas of Quebec City that are predominantly Muslim. The previous patrols were kind of in more working class areas, and now she wants to have patrols in areas where Muslims would be able to see them.
So these are just 2 we've talked about. There are more. La Meute, as I've been reading your work, you consider it sort of the moderate end of the far right, and then moving further and further right as we go to this group and beyond. In conjunction with all of this, obviously they exist and they're doing their activities in full view. There are voices in Quebec, political leaders, media hosts, people, broadcasters, who have taken up a real nationalist rhetoric in their discussions. How has that inflamed or had an effect on the far right sentiment that's already out there?
Well, just to give you an idea, some of these, this kind of constellation of radio stations in Quebec is known as Radio Poubelle, or garbage radio, trash radio. I guess the better translation is shock jocks. These are kind of shock jocks. Very popular in Quebec City, very popular in the kind of more rural areas around Quebec City. And so just to give you a sense, on these radio stations, you will get sympathetic defenses of La Meute. They're kind of misunderstood. What's so wrong with their message anyway? Why do we consider them far right? That kind of stuff like that. Now, what's very interesting is to see the kind of soul-searching and hand-wringing that has gone on since Sunday. Quebec City Mayor Régis Lebon, who is somebody who has made questionable comments about Muslims in the past, yesterday or 2 days ago came out and said, we need to have a debate about Radio Poubelle. We need to have a debate about the role these radio stations play in fostering intolerance. And he specifically used the line that, nobody should profit on hate. And so he wants to kind of launch a debate about their role in Quebec society.
And it's interesting from the politicians as well, from François Legault and from Jean-François Lisée, the opposition party leaders, and from the Premier as well. Everyone on this debate at the political level needs to re-examine their words, lower the tone. So that may be one of the effects of all of this. I'm wondering, though, what the far right is saying about the events on Sunday. Has there been a disavowal? Has there been, as abhorrent as that will be, a cheer for what has happened in the mosque on Sunday? What's been the reaction?
At least from the groups that I've been monitoring, the disavowal has been unanimous. Even amongst the most extreme groups, like Adelante Quebec, which is a neo-fascist organization, they've put out statements on their Facebook page saying, we disagree with violence. We disavow this act. But at the same time, it must be said that they're very conscious about what the kind of shift in tone, the shift in political climate that we've seen since Sunday may do to their own efforts to broaden their message. And so they're very conscious that they're under greater scrutiny. They've put out several messages. At least Meute has put out several messages trying to distinguish itself from the extreme right. They object to the term far right. They don't consider themselves far right. And also, interestingly, they recently put out a message on their Facebook page warning people. So provincial police officers just arrested somebody in Montreal for hate speech comments made online. And so they reposted that article saying, warning members, monitor your speech, watch your speech, and explicitly saying, if you engage in this kind of commentary on our Facebook page, we will kick you out of the group. So they're very conscious that the climate has shifted, and it represents a real threat to their efforts to seek greater legitimacy.
How long the climate has shifted, though, that's one of the questions that remains to be seen, obviously, in the immediate aftermath of something so horrific. We talk about it, it softens, but what next? Jonathan, as many questions as I've had and our viewers have had, we're just really touching the issue at the surface. So thank you for this. We could continue on at much greater length, but why don't I direct you to what Jonathan has been reporting? It's online for you, his whole series on far right in Quebec. You'll find out more about Meute and the soldiers of Odin and the other nationalist groups in the province and nationally. It's at CBCNews.ca, important reading. And Jonathan, thank you for being our guest this morning.